Like many of you, my favorite book in the Bible is the book of Psalms. And in the book of Psalms, Psalm 139 is one of my favorite Psalms because it talks about the greatness of our God. For example, the Psalm opens talking about how God is omniscient and he knows everything about us. Now, David was a poet, and so he doesn't just say that God is omniscient. That would be rather stale and dry for him to say it like that. And so David explains the extent of God's omniscience, his knowledge of us, by saying whether we're sleeping or whether we're active, God knows that. He knows whether we're home. He knows whether we're traveling. He knows even the words that are on our lips before we even speak them. And so this is David's way of saying that God completely surrounds us with his omniscience, with his knowledge. And then in that psalm, David goes on to explain how we're also surrounded by God's presence, his omnipresence. Again, David uses a lot of poetic language here to explain that. In verse 8, David says, "If I go all the way to the heavens or to the stars, you are there. Or if I go all the way down to the depths of the earth, you are there." And then he says, "If I go to the wings of the dawn," that's the east, that's where the sun is coming up in the east. "Or if I go to the far side of the sea," don't forget that the Mediterranean Sea was on the west side of Israel. And so the far side of the sea would be as far west as you could go. And so David is saying here, and poetically, he's saying, if I go as far east as I can go, you are there. If I go as far west as I can go, you're still there. You are everywhere. As a result of God's omnipresence, David then asks this question. He says, "Where can I flee from your presence?" And the answer, of course, is nowhere. Now, I think sometimes when we think of God's presence with us, we think of it as something spooky, or maybe something ethereal, or maybe even something that is abstract. But I don't think it's like that at all. Let me try and use this illustration to see if it might help you. If I flip on the switch in this room here, I could say that light is everywhere in this room here, or that this room is full of light. But actually, if I look around this room here, I can see parts of this room here where the light is less intense than other parts of this room here. There are some places where there's shadows. There are actually some places where it's actually quite dark in this room here. So even though we say the light is on in the room here, there's actually varying degrees of light in the room. In some places, it's full of light. In other places, it's dispersed, shadowed, or not so intense. That is not what it means when we're talking about God is everywhere or his presence is everywhere. What David is saying here is that he is everywhere and he is really completely present in every place, all of him. You see, God is not like light. There are not varying degrees of his presence or that he is only partially present at times. No, he's completely present everywhere. And what this means is that in the good times and also when times are difficult or our circumstances are hard, that we can't lose God. We have a God who is impossible to lose. He's a God who is always present with us. He is a God who holds us by the hand, and he will never let us go. In fact, David says in the psalm here that God is so present with him that even in death, God is still going to be with him. You know, until we really grab hold of this truth, it's really hard for us to trust God in all things. Without this truth, very often we see God as somebody who is with us in the emergency or only when we're going through a difficult time, but not a God whom we can trust in all the time because of his omnipresence with us. But once we grab hold of this truth, once we grab hold of this attribute of God, then it gives us a whole new way of looking at all of life. When we understand this truth, it means that everything that we say, everything that we do, everything that we think should be done with the realization of his presence with us. We truly serve a great God.